Awesome. So I'm Kara Roselle, and I'm the education director with NOFA Mass, and I'm here with my colleague John Duke, who is a board member with NOFA Mass, and with two of my favorite people, Deb Habib and Ricky Baruch. Ricky and Deb founded Seeds of Solidarity Farm and Education Center in Orange, Massachusetts, where they grow garlic and vegetables at the farm and for the North Quabbin community. They also train young farmers and offer on-farm education programs. Ricky and Deb also run the annual Garlic and Arts Festival, which is one of my personal favorite annual events. Ricky, as the lead farmer at Seeds of Solidarity Farm, was the first person I ever heard of who's doing organic no-till. And he's been building amazing soil and growing gorgeous crops ever since. Both Ricky and Deb have been maintaining a food justice focus in all of their endeavors and have worked to make farming and gardening accessible for everybody. They are also the authors of the book, Making Love While Farming, a field guide to a life of passion and purpose. I'll be dropping a link in the chat soon to that book. We are so lucky to get to hear from them today. But before we jump in, I just have a few details to review with you. We have a number of sponsors who help make our conference possible, and I do encourage you to purchase from them. And when you do, let them know that you appreciate their support of NOFA Mass. You can also find our sponsors in the virtual vendors market, where there are some great discounts for conference attendees. So please do check them out. And then, of course, most importantly, we want to thank you. Thank you for spending the weekend with us, and especially to our NOFA members who make our education and advocacy work possible. I just wanted to say a little bit about NOFA Mass and our working racial equity statement. I'll be dropping a link to that shortly into the chat. But we are aiming to make that a more central part of our work and to really drive our work at NOFA Mass. And to heal the harm that racism has caused in the food system, we really do urge our participants to act as allies to BIPOC communities whenever possible. There are a few ways that you can do that. One is to provide resources to BIPOC organizations, such as time and money. And another way is to be a partner and stand against white supremacist behavior and actions, which we've been seeing a little bit much of this week. And three, to work to dismantle racism within food and agricultural systems whenever you see an opportunity to do so. By working together to dismantle racism in the food system, the Commonwealth can truly feed and serve the commonality of us all. We acknowledge that we are on land that was managed and inhabited before European colonization. So we'll be dropping a link to this interactive map in the chat momentarily, but please do take some time this weekend to find your location and really understand more about the history of the land that you occupy. So with that, I think I will invite our wonderful presenters, Ricky and Deb, to take it away. I'm so excited for this presentation. Thanks, both of you.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here, and much appreciation to the NOFA staff and board, and for all the amazing efforts, and for all of you for showing up this morning. Hope you're relaxed and comfy, have the fire going, a cup of tea or something like that. So Deb Habib and
Ricky Baruch.
And we are Seeds of Solidarity, which is Orange, Massachusetts on Nipmuc land. And right now we're actually in a friend's guest room because we don't have great bandwidth. So that's we didn't intentionally place ourselves in front of a bookshelf. But so we're going to go back and forth with some screen sharing. So let me see if I can pull that up now. So we decided to divide the workshop into 3 parts, and Ricky and I are going to go back and forth on these, but just so you kind of have a sense of what's coming, we're going to talk just a little bit about why we felt the need for this workshop and are excited to offer it today. And then the heart of it is going to be focused on techniques and some simple tools for farming without farmland. And then the where, and that's especially where we'll hope to have some open conversation. What are some creative ways for accessing, sharing, collaborating on land, as well as challenges to make this more accessible to everyone. So we're going to just read a couple of quotes that we're sitting with. Don't know if I can actually see the whole of it because we have folks here. Let's see. Rick, can you see enough? Do you remember? Okay.
So when you hear these words, really, on our farm, we have lots and lots of quotes, and it's all about reminding us. And so I think these quotes really are very much in the essence of what we're going to be talking about. So beyond words, take it into your heart. Revolution is based on land. Land is the basis of all independence. Land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality. So that's magnificent in my mind. And the other one I found years ago, also another hero of ours, Paul Stamets. Farms can be reinvented as healing art centers, steering ecological evolution for the benefit of humans living in harmony with its inhabitants.
And some of you may have seen a recent essay by Arundhati Roy, where she says, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine the world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. And some of these beautiful folks at the bottom are Garlic Harvest crew, not from this past year. We were masked this year, but this is the year before. And then a group of young people in our Craft Your Own Life program at Seeds of Solidarity. So at this point, we're gonna invite you, if you'd like, to add this to the chat rather than verbally. But if you would like to put into the chat a passion or a core value that you bring to farming or your desire to farm. So feel free, no obligation, but feel free. And we're going to talk a little bit more about, why we're doing this workshop. But again, feel free to add any word or phrase from the heart, a passion or a core value that you bring to farming or your desire to farm, just so we can learn a little bit more about each other that way. So we wanted to talk a little bit more about, again, the why this topic and workshop.
Whew. Farmer and farming diversity. The image of the farm and farming as large acreage, rural, white male-led, machinery and input heavy is out of reach for most. It is not what the world needs now. Time is overdue for economically vibrant, personally sustainable agriculture shaped by racially, culturally, gender, and age-diverse farmers.
You want to say any more about that? No? Okay, we'll get to more. And this can be part of our little, conversation after this first section too. So feel free to add comments about these whys to the chat now if you wish as well. Food access and justice. In order for everyone to be nourished with healthy, affordable food, cultivation and distribution must be decentralized, carried out intensively in smaller spaces, and with close to the source markets throughout rural, urban, and suburban communities. And one of our tagline at Seeds of Solidarity is grow food everywhere. And that's very much aligned, with this idea of, and this essential piece when we think about market gardening and farming, of how do we raise more land, raise more food in all of our communities for these very reasons here. And just to mention before we go on to the next, as Carol kind of said at the beginning, Ricky and I were married and we're co-creators of Seeds of Solidarity. And my day-to-day work is more focused on the work of our nonprofit organization, Food Justice and Education, and Ricky's day-to-day is running our family farm, which are fiscally separate entities.
Building soil, revitalizing land. Typical farmland is out of financial reach for most. We're already developed or prone to climate extremes like flooding. Building healthy soil, climate resilient no-till agroecological techniques, simple tools, and creative use of local resources promotes climate change, climate resilience, affordability, and a more sacred relationship with the land.
So the name of our book is Making Love While Farming, a field guide to a life of passion and purpose. So, you know, the combination of those things, passion and purpose, you don't need to try to do it all. And I think that's a critical piece for all of us as farmers. And I think in particular, people entering farming newly or taking it over from a family member. You don't need to try to do it all or do it the same as everyone else. Find methods and your niche as a farmer that reflect your values, skills, resources, and your community. Collaborate to create a whole system. We often will talk with people about, you know, viewing ourselves more like an ecosystem, a social ecosystem, and that, you know, we need bees, but we have someone in our community that loves to have her bees on our land so that we don't have to take ultimate responsibility of that. And the list goes on of the ways that we can, I think, collaborate better to create a whole system and get better at pieces of that. And importantly, what can you sustain for the long haul? You know, a lot of farmers leave farming new farmers leave farming after 5 to 8 years because it's stressful financially, on a relationship, on the body. So, you know, what can you do to sustain farming for the long haul? So I'm going to go to the next screen and I'm trying to find out. Okay, there we go. So I don't know if I'm seeing the chat. So I think maybe at this point, if people want to share anything about, I'm going to do stop share, I think. Is that right? And then if people want to share anything about what was in the chat or other thoughts related to what we have just mentioned. So I think Caro, our host, will offer some of the phrases from the chat.
Yeah, so Tony, in no particular order, Tony says core value, pleasure, which I think resonates with a lot of us. Anne says connection and racial equity. Dawn says connecting to nature and the origin of food. We have another Deb in the room tonight who says love of earth and also raising money for inclusivity in the farming industry, focusing on rematriation and reparations for BIPOC. And I said to connect with the miraculous and visible world of soil life, which to me is the interface between life and death. Any other comments, folks?
Yeah. Or comments on those, the whys that we just offered are fine too.
There was a question about whether these slides would be available, Deb and Ricky as well.
Yeah, we can find a way to make them available. The great tech people at NOFA can help us do that. And is that true? Okay, I know the recording's available, will be available, right?
Right. The easiest thing for me would be for you to email me. I'm putting my email in the chat right now. So just email me if you'd like a copy of the slides and I will email them to you later.
Okay, yeah, and the recording will be available afterwards, so you'll have them that way. All right, well, thank you everybody for what you contributed there. I'm going to go back into share screen. Just by the way, oops, that by the way is a, sorry. That is a photograph outside of our local food co-op in Orange. And I did not take it, but I think it's really cool. So we're gonna move into the second part. And again, as mentioned, sort of the heart of the presentation. And I think we're actually doing quite well for time. Good, so you don't have to rush at all, Ricky. And Rick will take the bulk of this. So for some farming without farmland methods. And again, feel free to add questions to the chat as we share some of these images of no-till soil and farm building techniques. And then also in particular, maybe consider questions as we're going through this, sort of looking through the lens of your own passion, community, experiences, hopes, to consider some questions about or thinking about the resources available or needed in your community and or on your land, if you are currently on land, farming it or wishing to activate these no-till soil building techniques. So any questions, and then, you know, along the lines here, and I think we'll probably have time to do some verbally as well as chat at the end of our presentation. We just kind of want to flow through the presentation and then take questions by your choice of chat or verbal afterwards. Is that right? Okay. All right. Wish we were sitting in a circle with you all, by the way, but that time will happen. Wish you were on our farm. A little chilly today, but we will be hoping for some more small group workshops this coming season.
So just to get a sense of why the title Farming Without Farmland is that image I had of a young person going to a conference and kind of getting razzled dazzled. They went to a workshop and then they walk out of the workshop and think to themselves, well, how am I ever going to, you know, I saw this beautiful workshop, but how am I ever going to afford land, the machinery that I've just seen in this workshop, housing, the energy, you know, the power, bringing the power lines, whatever it is, solar. How am I ever going to do this? So, you know, you get all the, you know, this image of someone getting so excited and just kind of like, there's no way. And even listen to Greg, who's a total mentor of mine. I'm thinking, you know, here I am 58 years old. I'm thinking, you know, like it's beyond daunting of how, you know, as the system is set up, hence Malcolm X's quote. And also it was a great piece by Curtis Stone in his book, the whatever it's called. And his whole thing, you know, was, you know, he realized there's no way I was going to save up enough money. He was going to save up enough money to buy land. And the truth of the matter is that's how the system's set up. It's not, you're not going to do that. So we really have to be absolutely incredibly creative to do this. So, and the truth of the matter is that years back, they wanted to get farmers off the land because farmers have power, back to the Malcolm X quote. So it's all tied in, but I'll just give you that. So that is what, for me, that's a deep passion of mine. It's like, we're at a precipice and we all have to grow food and reconnect back to the earth. And how are you going to do this?
So this was a recently logged small clearing in Orange about 22 years ago. And so this, I'm going to show you what this spot looks like now.
Yeah. And just so you know, we a great piece we wrote years ago called the cycle of ecological oppression. People said we couldn't do this. You know, the land trust we bought our land from, the word got back to us. It always gets back to you. So careful what you say. A local community member who had a farm, all that stuff, says they're never going to be able to farm that land. You know, and I'm sure that puts some doubt in people's minds in that meeting, like, well, maybe he's right, you know. So I think it's really important that you really have to, throughout your experience of life, be a spiritual warrior to stay focused. So.
No, but with this,
Okay.
if you want to.
Yeah. So this is really the key. We use 3 no-till techniques. Oh, I lost the words.
Sorry. Oops. Sorry. Going back here. Sorry.
Okay. We use 3 no-till techniques at Seeds of Solidarity Farm to build and restore healthy soil. Cardboard with mulch, cover crops, and tarping. These are adaptable, diverse settings and goals and creative use of available resources. Nourishing soil ecosystems while mitigating climate change. So it's a great shot right here. To the left, you see rye growing. And a lot of it, it's all about, as people would say, a placeholder. So it doesn't turn back into so-called weeds. So the rye is really holding it down. All the way to the right, you see the tarps, which are incredibly wonderful. And then you see the garlic growing in mulch. And then the front part, you can see the cardboard, which is my ultimate favorite. And I think the key piece is not to get stuck too much on technique, but all about experimentation. Just try them all. And so you really want to have multiple tools in your toolbox.
I also want to just add, if it's okay here, just to give you a little bit more context for where we are, for people who aren't familiar with the region. So Orange is one of the lowest wealth communities in Massachusetts. It's in the region called the North Quabbin, which is one of 9 towns north of what is now the Quabbin Reservoir, which used to be a valley of 4 towns and fertile agricultural land until it was taken by eminent domain to become water supply for Boston. And of course, you know, going back and still it's Nipmuc land. So there was, you know, very rich in indigenous community life. There were then, you know, other folks who came in for better or worse, who were farming the land. There was a railway going through the valley that connected Athol to Springfield, which, you know, are now we're very geographically isolated from a lot of places. So again, when we came onto this land on the edge of Orange, we weren't looking at one big open space saying, okay, here we go. You know, so there was just small little patches here and there within the woods and around that had been logged, that we had to figure out how to work in terms of small patches. So like what you're seeing here is like one of those patches, you know, probably maybe a 3/4 of an acre, something like that patch. But there's spots that are just, you know, 1/8 of an acre, 1/4 of an acre. So that's why I think a lot of these that all kind of come together to make our farm, but each of those could be seen as a little micro farm in its own as well. So we're rural, but a lot of the techniques are adaptable to a lot of settings because of these little micro farms that make up one farm, so to speak.
This is the ultimate in my mind, after farming for over 30 years, cardboard. And what I love about it is it's so accessible. We'll have done workshops on our farm for years, or open houses, and show them solar, all this cool stuff. And when the workshop is over, gathering's over, we say, what are you going to take home with you? And almost 80% of the participants would say cardboard. So the point is that we need something, it's got to be fun, and it's got to be accessible and affordable. And what blows my mind about this truckload right here could do an area 30 feet wide by 100 feet long. So that is completely a small mini farm, and it's 1 truckload.
Like that.
And that's it. The cardboard method, no-till, improve the soil of small farms, lawns, or lots. And actually, we took a walk yesterday with a couple newer to gardening, and she was so excited about the amount of worms from the cardboard, not bringing in worms, you know, miraculous. And just so you know, Charles Darwin's best work was with worms, everything. But what really hit me was we needed, the ultimate reason for everything we do is to reconnect back to earth. You know, why are we even talking about the Nipmuc and the previous folks? It's we got to regain our connection back to the earth. And you're not going to see any other creatures in the earth. So the earthworms are really the pinnacle of what you could see in the earth. And so how incredible for a gardener getting started. It's like, wow, it's happening. Life in the soil. And so cardboard, of all things I've experienced in the farming world, is miraculous. And that's really the goal, is we have to all ages, from young ones to old ones, get them connected, reconnected. We are life. And without that connection, we're going nowhere.
Let's say a little more about when you can put it down and putting stuff on top.
Yeah, this is always a big question, when to put it down. And I'm saying all the time. And I have a country store in Peterson that called me. They need to get rid of their cardboard. They want me to pick it up maybe every 2 weeks. So you find your connections. Furniture stores, bike stores. I have a wooden toy company nearby, a cardboard. You find your connections and you just keep collecting it and just putting it down. You can't put enough down, and year round, and the earth will respond. It's exactly what the earth wants. The earth wants to be covered.
And so does the cardboard with some organic material. And Rick will talk more about that. But this, what you can see here, you know, we'll use mulch hay or a less expensive source of manure, something just to cover it and hold it down. But this is actually corn, right? The corn that you
Corn
cleared
stalk,
from that
yeah.
area, corn stalk put on top of the cardboard.
And what's great about that photo is really the whole essence is you want to keep your land always covered. And when we talk about farming, it's about where you're going to access land. But we need people that aren't just type A. And after farming for all these years, so many of the farmers I know are very type A, nothing wrong with type A, but we need everyone involved in growing food. And so the reason I say that is we need to be able to do it in a chill fashion. And so it's neurotic farming is because you're like, I got to get in the land, I got to till it up. And then when it's till, I gotta do something. And it's just like this, you're in this absolute race. It's not very Buddhist-like, and it's crazy making. So everything we do is crazy making around farming. So we have to find ways of growing food that aren't crazy making, and that being keep the land covered so you're not going crazy. And then you basically, over time through the season, okay, I'm gonna plant in the cardboard. I'll lift up the tarp and I'll plant there, or I'll plant into the cover crop. But you're not driving yourself crazy all the time, because the truth of the matter is that it's great. You know, we see all these numbers about all these young farmers getting into farming, but the dirty truth is we don't talk about how many leave. Oh, all these new people getting into it, but how many are leaving? In Maine, NOFA in Maine MOFCA really put it out there. Like they're finding after 8 years, they're out of it. So that's real. But it's really about not just in this culture, it's about a job. We have to find a life way, a way to live on this planet. And so living with the land is really the future.
And again, as we keep going through these slides of different techniques, this again is all about building fertility, So if we didn't say that strongly enough, that's what this is about. So the farming without farmland is, the question, how do we build soil? And how do we build soil using local community resources? How do we build soil that supports a healthy soil ecosystem? How do we build relationships in our community while we're finding the resources to build the soil? And how do we do it economically? We didn't have much money to start, so we had to be very creative and experiment with a lot of local resources. We still don't have much money, but whatever, we're fine.
This is a really great job. In front of the Dalai Lama greenhouse on the right, all our greenhouses are named. I remember someone coming down from UMass, they thought we were absolutely off the wall. And I think that's important. I think the more off the wall you are, the chances are you're going in the right direction. The more people see, oh, they're pretty straight, you're going nowhere.
And remember again, so this is still that area that you saw in the very first slide.
Yeah.
That logged clearing. Yeah. This is what it looks like now.
So this is all cardboard, mulch on top. And so the premise is the classic book, Farmers of 40 Centuries, is that we're so addicted to fertilizer. They didn't have brought in fertilizers. So there's got to be a way of growing food in what I call is the no-till self-sustaining cardboard method, where you sustain that level and you just keep adding cardboard. You don't have to keep adding more and more compost. That is the fertilizer, the mulch, the moisture control, the life. So you'll see is there's cardboard, there's straw, hay, and got some indigenous corn on the right, tomatoes and sunflowers. And then all the way, you can see a little strip of tarp and garlic growing.
Say a little bit more about why the cardboard's building fertility. Clearly a time for that.
So why cardboard's building fertility is, it's all about worms. There is I don't believe another creature on the planet that everything it eats, blow your mind, comes out 5 to 10 times richer. Okay, so if only that, I used to have all these numbers in my head, but I don't really have right now. But everything comes out richer. And it is just this, and think a great film we just saw about the octopus. Nature is everything, right? We're not this dominant species, or we think we're this dominant species, and we're just gonna truck this stuff in from who knows where. We have to work with nature. And so our greatest ally, I feel, is the earthworm. So what we're saying is we really farm worms, not in the traditional sense. All our land is farming worms. And then, so basically, if remember anything, is that all worm farms feed their worms cardboard. And the best fertilizer is worm poop. So it's this really incredibly synergistic thing. It's free. It's a waste product. That's what I also love. Talk about alchemy, turning lead into gold. So, yeah.
And also, you know, for others less familiar with the benefits of no-till, there's a lot of them. And, you know, by feeding the soil through cardboard, through mulches, through some other techniques we're going to talk about in just a moment here, you know, as Ricky was saying, you're feeding the worms, you're feeding the microbial life, you're allowing mycorrhizal fungi to flourish. And there's all these relationships between all of these. So you're not only building soil with organic matter, but you're also making nutrients more available to plants. So, you know, in terms of expediting basically the process of building healthy topsoil, these no-till techniques are ways of doing that essentially. So again, back to this whole topic of if you're talking about, you know, a vacant lot, you know, or trying to figure out how to build soil in small spaces around a mosque or a temple or a church, you know, or you have a suburban lawn that's maybe, you know, been stripped of a lot of its fertility. You can build soil quickly using a lot of the, relatively quickly using a lot of these no-till techniques.
Once again, that octopus movie comes back to me. The octopus wanted to have a relationship with this human being, and it's the same with the worms. You know, we talk about talking to the land, talking to the plants. We need a relationship. And the microbes are a little trickier to have a relationship with. It's harder to see, but at least the worms, you can see them. So they want to interact with us. We want to have a relationship, but what do? If it wasn't for the first 1 foot of soil, we wouldn't exist. Nothing would exist, right? What do we do with our dominant colonial mindset? What do? We go in there with our fine machinery, which we make lots of money selling all this machinery, and we just destroy it. You know, is that any relationship? So it's really about honoring the soil, honoring the life in the soil, and honoring our relationship and where we are in this whole incredible experience.
So this is a small scale example of something that can be done, and we've done on a larger scale. Again, if you kind of need to get plants in the ground, but don't have as much organic matter, this is a great technique.
And that's the beautiful thing about it. Lawns, you know, in less than an afternoon, you have a little garden going. But basically what you're seeing here is furniture cardboard put down on just rough land. It could be sod. You cut out that ring. You shovel out the existing soil, most likely it's not very rich. You put in some nice compost, finished compost. Chicken compost is our favorite. And then you put your plant in, and then put some mulch around it, some wood chips, leaf mold, everything you can get basically free. And you always want to keep the cardboard covered for not only for not to blow away, but to keep it moist. And that's the whole thing, is keeping it moist, because that's what worms are all about. We call the worm's perfect singles bar. They want to stay moist for them to exist.
And below ground, so the birds don't eat them.
Exactly.
And then the cardboard will break down. Thanks everybody for your patience, by the way. We have a few more slides and then we'll open up the chat and the conversation, but hope folks are getting.
There we are, putting the plants in. And this is also really relevant, very Will Allen-esque. If you're on a brownfield land that's not very, we don't know what's going on, bringing it up and bringing wood chips up. And it's basically doing the same technique, but you made a base of wood chips. And just so you know, that's basically what we did on the farm, is that we needed a farm. Basically, we came onto the land. We really thought we can make our living through the nonprofit. That wasn't happening. So I had to go back into either building or farming. I went back into building, and there we were with the worst land imaginable in terms of growing stuff.
Back to farming, not building.
I went back into farming. And so how do I do it? So we were making Insta beds, and within 3 weeks we were selling arugula, high quality greens to the fanciest restaurants in Franklin County. So I think that the reason I say that is that the media is not going to tell you when the shit really hit the fan, even though it's hit the fan. So we need to figure out ways of growing food, and once people get tuned into it, quickly, you know. So these are really quick, down and dirty, and inexpensive ways of growing food.
Mm-hmm. And again, we'll be happy to answer some questions about this in a few.
This is why really a really favorite technique. There's a technique called crimping. It's kind of taken over. Rodale, a real mentor of ours, has really been pushing. The whole idea is you grow a cover crop. Cover crops are great. The traditional one would be rye and vetch together. And what they do is they come along and they crimp it. They don't cut it, it would grow back. They break the stem, which is wonderful. And then you basically have a carpet of a cover crop that dies and you plant into it. Amazing technique. Keeps the weeds from coming up. The downside of it is it's just green matter and it's going to break down pretty fast, especially if you have a lot of organic matter, a lot of life in the soil, and then you're dealing with the weeds. So a lot of farmers are actually then adding leaf mold and other ways of keeping the weeds down. So I think is a better technique personally is actually let that cover crop grow and plant within it. So it's a pretty straightforward, simple thing. And the beautiful thing is, especially with corn, you can plant it quite far away, or winter squash, and have lots of the cover crop growing. So the beautiful thing is you're doing double duty here. You're growing a cover crop and the plant. So basically what I did is we had sown the cover crop. You could sow it early spring. The beautiful thing about rye could be 34 degrees soil, or you could sow it in the fall. Very simple to grow. Rye wants to grow. The rye is about 1 foot tall, and I lay out a string. You can see the string in the photo. And when I say I lay out a string, I have two pieces of rebar on either end of the bed, a clothesline, very high tech, and they come in with a wheelbarrow. And I just lay out an 8-inch wide path of compost, good chicken compost. And basically that's going to kill the rye below it. And with a dibble, our favorite tool, you're just going to dibble right through it every foot and put your corn seedlings in.
Or whatever.
We've worked with corn, which we really love, or winter squash with this technique. And so what you're having is you're growing the crop and you're growing the rye. So the cover crop's doing its thing, the crop's doing its thing, and no weeds. So there are our favorite simple tools. Hori knife from A.M. Leonard, multiple dibbles. You can see the barrel has lots of wood chips in it, leaf mold in the gray container there. And the beautiful thing about it, it's all free. Landfills are great. If you have a farm, you can put up a sign, have people bring the leaves to your farm. That's what we did on the Cape. But wood chips, leaf molds, mulch, meaning that the farmer, it got wet, so it's inexpensive. And just be creative.
A lot of urban areas, we're looking probably more at, figuring out how to use wood chips, how to use leaves, things like that. Do you want to say more about the dibble tool? Because a lot of people aren't familiar with that. This is the
dibble is big in Europe, big in Holland, bulb. It's all about bulb planting in Holland, and they're great farmers in Holland. But dibble, basically, it's very ancient. Talk about indigenous tools. It's basically you're not really messing with the soil. You're just basically plunging the dibble in the ground and putting your seedling into it.
So we don't have a tractor. We didn't mention that. Ricky did on his previous farm. We'll talk about that in a minute. But, so really farming, maybe we have, I should have mentioned the total. We've got 500-foot greenhouses, and we'll show a picture of one of those in a minute. And then maybe 2.5 to 3 acres in cultivation. More like
1.5 maybe.
Okay, now. And then fruit trees and things like that, and herb gardens and kitchen gardens. But really, with these kind of both soil building and labor saving techniques now and simple tools, we run a viable farm.
It's a myth. Everything you learn in school is a myth. This actually is one of my favorites. It doesn't build like the cardboard, but this is actually, we learned from an accident. So I think it's really important when things go wrong. We have all this compost we've been using. It was our favorite chicken compost. And we used to plant like 300-foot beds a week. All of a sudden, all those beds, all they were lamb's quarters. And so somehow lamb's quarters got into it. So I had to figure out a way to kill it. I thought, I found out about these silage tarps. Long story short, it worked. The photo on the left is really a great photo because it was after the garlic crop. I only had so much tarp. I covered the bed with the tarp, and you can see there's nothing growing. All that organic matter is dying. To the right, I hadn't had enough tarp, and you can see in 3 weeks, you'll get 3 feet of weeds if you have rich soil. And I've done that in the greenhouses in the spring. I really wanted to bring in the bees. And so I knew a way I'm going to deal with it. So I basically let all our arugula, all our greens go to flower.
For pollinators.
For pollinators. So they grew about 3 feet tall very quickly. But I knew how to deal with it. So basically, you know, cut it down or knock it down, cover with tarp. In 2 weeks, that was all organic matter. So the best, great picture on the right. No matter how long that organic matter has been growing, you cover with a tarp and it will die. And just as a fact, the best what we call tilled ground to plant into for seeds is after tarp. It is just miraculous. And especially if, you know, the soil life is rich, it makes the most incredible seed bed imaginable.
Mm-hmm. And these are super heavy duty. And again, they can be upcycled from other materials as we spoke of. But if anyone who shows up at our farm in the right or wrong time might be like, hey, help us move this tarp for a minute, because they are heavy and you want to just have a few people haul it for a few minutes.
But the beautiful thing is that you cover the tarp and then you uncover it and you're ready to plant. So this is
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Want me to go back?
No.
Want to say something about the hoop
No,
houses?
go for it.
So just a few more slides and then we'll open it up. Thanks again for your patience and we hope this is helpful. We mentioned that we do a lot of our growing in hoop houses, and again, in part, not having, you know, a huge amount of land, we had to grow very intensively and extend the season. But again, some of these same techniques, like Ricky mentioned, he'll use a cover crop, he'll use some tarping in the hoop houses, and all of these things have evolved. You know, we don't have all the answers even after, you know, 3 decades of farming. We definitely don't. But, you know, really be creative. Think about what techniques you have in your toolbox or you want to have in your toolbox and how they can support each other, because there's different things that are right for different settings and different times. But growing in unheated hoop houses, and they can be small, in small spaces, you know, are really critical adaptation for climate resilience. And we love growing greens. That's one of our main market crops, because you can grow and extend the Northeast season without fossil fuels and grow really beautiful greens, and they're nourishing and good for people.
Just to finish back to that picture, I mean, how miraculous the tarps are is that previous to tarps, when the bed was done, basically I harvested, you know, up to 10, 12 times. What I used to have to do is either scythe it, hoe it, take out all that organic matter and bring it out, compost. Now, basically, all I have to do is cover I have tarps now, I cut them 5 feet wide and let it sit for about a week, week and a half. And now all that organic matter went back into the earth and I can start planting. So in terms of one's time and energy and what's better for the earth.
Mm-hmm. We also just financially for market, and in order to be able to, you know, be viable, because our soil was so thin, greens were a really good, important starting crop for us. And they remain so, because, you know, they don't need the depth that like root crops and things do. So again, that just like, well, what could we grow? What do we love to grow? What is our land kind of specifying at this point in time? Were all questions. I just want to say a little bit, and I think Tony Hall's on the call here, our wonderful colleague, who is the garden coordinator at Franklin County Jail, where we, with Tony, teach some gardening courses. But I put these pictures in here. On the left, that's a converted factory in orange, and these are some raised beds we put in just for the social service agencies inside. This is more sort of my side of things at Seeds of Solidarity. On the right are some of the garden beds. There's more now that we, with the garden coordinator, Tony and others before him, built with people who are incarcerated. But I put this in just again to kind of reinforce, as we think about farming without farmland, we are really thinking, I think, about market gardening and micro farms without farmland too, because, you know, as we've said, accessing larger swaths of land is out of reach for most, and it might not be the right direction anyway, because, you know, they think there's a lot of questions, very righteous questions about land ownership and, you know, should individuals own land that was never theirs, ours to start with? And there are definitely ways to do that in more collaborative models. But I think this you know, thinking about, again, a farm, and I look forward to hearing people's questions, our farm does not have to look the way you think it has to look, right? We can be creative, and we must be creative to do things differently in our own communities. This is the center of Orange. This was just a program with our youth, but I always like that fresh food available sign posted in front of the real estate sign on a lot there. And I just did want to mention again before we break into the chat and conversation, Ricky, had a farm in New York State. That was the 20-acre organic tractor farm model. And it was beautiful. And they did a lot of good work, and they helped start Finger Lakes Organic and other things like that. But if you don't mind me saying, it just wasn't personally or humanly sustainable. And he, in terms of his passion, didn't want to be on a tractor all day long. Even if it was growing a lot of food, it was not sustainable in a lot of ways. But I just felt like it was important to kind of put this in, because sort of we did that, and realized it wasn't quite right. And that is in part informed what we do now. So you've all been incredibly awesome and patient and wonderful. And I'm going to stop the screen share now and see where we are. So Caro and John, how do we want to do this?
Well, lots of fantastic questions have been coming in about the techniques. So I think that I will probably try to just get to all the ones that have been placed in the chat. And then we can, I think you have a few more slides before we open it up to discussion, or?
No, we can talk about what we did now. Yeah, we'd love to have some discussion here. I think time-wise, we've got about good 10 or 15 minutes. We can talk now if to make sure we respond to people's questions. Then we want to get more into a more just open conversation about creative ways to collaborate on and access land. And we have a few more slides for that after.
Awesome. That's what I thought. Great. Just confirming. So let me go ahead and tell you the questions that have come in so far, and I've organized them by topic, and then we can, if there's time, we can invite people to pose a few live. So there were some questions about initialization. So Anne was wondering, how do you decide which techniques to employ off the bat, which works best in what kind of circumstances? And specifically, how do you deal with land that has a lot of invasive plants?
Great. Hi, Anne. Thanks for that good question.
Well, the beautiful thing is the multiple tools. What I love is like the tarp technique. So you have a big lawn, for example, or just rough land. The beautiful thing is cover it. After a few weeks, months, you can just pull it back. And the nice thing is you're just pulling it back as necessary. So you're not overwhelmed. Like, the typical situation, you get your neighbor out and they till it up, and then you got this big plot and you're running around trying to figure out how to deal with it. So that's the beautiful thing about the tarp. By far, our favorite is cardboard. So those probably the two starters, cardboard and tarp. And just so you know, before we had tarps, we didn't really do much cover crops because it was really hard to get just open land, because once you put the cardboard down, you got to lift it up and plant that, the cover crops. So cardboard and tarps.
Mm-hmm. Also, just around the invasives and weeds, if you keep doing it over and over, the thing about tilling is every time you till, you're bringing weed seeds to the surface, and they're like, hallelujah, sunshine, light, let me grow, right? But if you don't do that, and you just stay in this cycle of no-till and covering and feeding, then you're going to stop those cycles. So it's also really great, not only for weed prevention, because they can't get through like the cardboard, but like the tarping or cover cropping once you start getting into those cycles. And it does take a little maybe patience at first. You have to kind of keep saying, this is going to work. I just kind of have to stick with it a little bit, because there's this desire to till, but we all know that you go in there with the tiller and it looks great for 48 hours, and then then you're going to start having to deal with either erosion or weeds or, drought or something like that. And that's an important thing also about using some of these methods. When you build the soil and are getting to these cycles, you're also conserving a lot of water. And that is tremendous, because water is sacred, and a lot of people don't have access to water. Great question.
Deb was wondering if you test the underlying soil for contamination first.
Good question. At the beginning, we did some testing. What's interesting about all this stuff is that our soils are now really basic, and it's very acid land because indicator plant with the mountain laurel. We've never purchased lime. So I think that the testing has its place, definitely around toxic stuff. But other than that, it can be misleading.
Yeah, I would say definitely if you have reason to think or believe that there may have been some toxicity on the land, certainly do that. But another benefit of this sort of building from the ground up rather than going down is you're building from the ground up. So you're not only boosting a lot of microbial life to help in that cleansing process, but you're also not going down into, you're going up. And that, again, like that picture, for example, of creating a base of wood chips and going up from there is great, especially if land might have had some toxicity. But if you have reason to believe, certainly there might have been lead or some other brownfield toxicity testing to know what you're working with is a good idea, and then making sure you build up rather than going down.
Great. And we did have a resiliency skills series episode on starting a garden safely in urban and suburban soils. It gets into some of those topics, and I just dropped a link to that into the chat. That was a NOFA Mass session earlier this spring. So there's another question about from Ellen. How much time should transpire between applying your cardboard and planting through it? And I think that might depend a little bit on where your soil's at.
And the season, yeah.
It's a great question. Basically, as long as the cardboard gets wet, it'll make it a lot easier to dribble through, either from rain or hosing it down. But the beautiful thing is, the sooner you can plant into the cardboard, the better, because it's going to have more weed controlling capacity. If you wait too long, it's losing its weed controlling capacity. So you really want to get the cardboard down, wet it, and plant into it. I think that's really, yeah.
Awesome. And so now a few questions about tarping specifically. Ellen was wondering if weed seeds are killed or just the plants.
That's a great question. I saw that. That's a really, Carol might be able to, boy, I don't really have the answer for that one. What would you say, Carol?
So with occultation using black plastic tarps or black and white silage tarps, generally no, weed seeds are not killed. The idea is to germinate, cause like a flush of germination, and then there's no light, so they die. But weed seeds that don't germinate for whatever reason aren't killed. The University of Maine did a study with solarization, so that's using clear plastic, that when they used in test plots that had clear plastic tarps for an entire growing season, the only viable weed seeds in the top inch of soil that remained after an entire season of solarization were purslane seeds. So there is active research happening on this, and I recommend the UMaine weed ecology blog. I can drop a link later for research about that.
Thank you.
So another question about tarping. Deb is wondering how long you leave the tarp on.
Well, that's really cool. We did a great thing. Please check out our cardboard method YouTube and the next one after that around cover crops. And so I really wanted to know how fast. So it's really amazing. Rye is known as very tenacious and very hard to kill. And in that video, we realized it was like 17 days later, I think it was. Check out the video. Tarped it, and it was gone. All that organic matter. So I think what's really key about this piece is that when you say the word cover crops, you immediately think the only way to deal with it is till it in. But in my mind, it defeats the whole point, because it's just a green matter. When you till it in, it defeats, in my point, okay? But the whole idea of covering the tarp, all that organic matter and feeding the life in the soil. So that's really, really it. It's like, it's biology over machinery, basically. So yeah, I think, like I said, rye is very tough to get rid of. And in the greenhouses, all those baby greens are weak. So the tarps really work. And it also has to do, the more you build up the soil, the faster it's going to break down.
Deb was also wondering if you'd favor cardboard over tarps, and I imagine it's really a circumstance-specific scenario.
And it's what you want, is that when we look at it, when we see it, is that if you're going to have transplants, you got cardboard, okay? But if you want to put cover crops in or scatter sow seeds, direct seed, you want a tarp. Like I said, with the tarp, you cover it. It is so miraculous. And all that's left is this organic matter. You just rake it away, and you got this gorgeous seed bed. Not only a seed bed, you got about 1/8 or 1/4 inch of worm castings at the top. It is utterly miraculous. And at one point, I thought to myself, wow, is it getting too hot under the tarps in the greenhouse? And so I lifted it up one day, and all that organic matter was getting gushy, and the worms were going crazy. So the worms were underneath all that gushiness. And once all that gushiness started to dry out, they went down below. So it works.
That's really well stated. Thank you. And Anne was wondering where to get silage tarps, or where do you get your silage tarps? They can be pricey.
Yeah, there are, I know for growing for market, I've done all these things where people going in all together because there's farmers getting rid of their silage tarps. So going into bulk, taking them from the farms and spreading them out. But there's a whole thing called billboards.com. You can access them. But the other thing is growers supplies, garden centers, they do have them.
We like Greenfield, because where we live, we like to support cooperatives as much as possible. So Greenfield Farmers Cooperative Exchange. But as Ricky was saying, if you don't need the big size, you might share it with someone. And they do last like 8, 9 years.
If not more.
Yeah. So we consider it appropriate, a form of appropriate technology. Our farm and our home are off the grid. We use all solar electricity for everything. And we do our very best to minimize reliance and use of fossil fuels. So but this one thing is sort of, a key appropriate technology to help with these methods. But yeah, sharing it, billboard covers, lumber covers, sometimes old lumber covers.
Exactly.
Yeah, lumber covers can be used and found for smaller areas. Recycled.
I use a lot of lumber covers myself. Yep. Noah is mentioning that he has found that using silage tarps to incorporate cover crops like buckwheat, tillage, radish, make a home for tons of voles, which then ate other crops as well. So any ideas for how to work with that?
Molex.
No-till conversation without talking about voles.
Yeah, Molex is a great product. I think it's castor oil. They don't like castor oil. Yeah, people will mention moles, will mention slugs. I think really the truth of the matter is, hopefully the ecosystem, I have a good one for you now, works its way out. Deb walked in the greenhouse, and usually we shut all our greenhouses. One door came down, and we have an owl living in our greenhouse, a big owl. And so I think it's an interesting piece. It's not to say there's an answer for everything, but making the ecosystem figure its way out. But I definitely think it balances itself out. And just like the worms have made our acid soil basic, we really don't have that many slugs. We don't really have that many moles. And I think, wildlife. And I think that's the other piece about it is that we have to think outside the box. And where we are growing on is surrounded by forest. So there are a lot of predators. And so the tradition is, you buy farmland. And so you're surrounded by farms with GMO, herbicide drift, but there's no wildlife to deal with the predators, So that said, porcupines have been my arch nemesis, and I haven't found the fisher cats enough of them. So that's a problem for us.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just want to put a quick plug for our monthly Mintel farmers calls on the first Monday of every month. We talk about voles about every other call because they are such a serious issue with minimum till farming. Great responses. Molex, I hadn't heard of that one before. So let's see. I think that was all the tarping questions. A few questions about worms, or do we need to move on, Deb? What do you think?
Maybe two more minutes or so.
Okay, great. Pat was wondering if you guys add any worms after sheet mulching.
Well, that's the beautiful thing about what we found here is that we're talking the worst imaginable growing land, okay? The worst. People say, what kind of soil is it? It's shit soil. There's no soil where we started, okay? And at the same time, we never purchased worms. Never really purchased bagged fertilizer or lime. So the point is that we turn this shit land into highly productive farm. And nature wants to work with us, just like the octopus, they want to collaborate. But what do? We have this obnoxious attitude. We are the king species And we just have no relationship with the land. So if anything, I think from this workshop to get from me is like, build your relationship back with the land. The land responds, the land speaks, but we're just doing all the wrong things.
On the other hand, with the worms also, some people have asked, like, can they become a problem? You know, when do worms become sort of invasive possibly? And Tom Wessel's amazing terrestrial ecologist, who's a good friend of ours, we used to bring groups out from Antioch, New England to our farm. And we asked him that question and he said, you know, keep feeding them and then they'll stay here and keep doing this beneficial work here, right? They have no reason to go into the forest if you're feeding them well on your farmland.
So I think that answered Anne's question, but just to reiterate, so worms will come back. If you have soil that's degraded and without worms, they'll come back if you do these methods?
Well, remember, anytime you add compost, manure, there's worms and they multiply. And the whole thing is like I said, the worms perfect single spar, they're going at it year round, you know, so they're producing. And just a really great fact, ready for this? 1 acre of rich worm-filled land will produce 250 tons. Is that possible? Like now I forget the number. It was from a book of worm castings per year. What is it? 250 tons? Yeah, I think that's what it was.
We'll double
It's
check
phenomenal
that.
amount of poop. But it's basically, as Tom Wessel says, we're like above ground creatures, but above ground is amazing. So rather than always thinking, how much do I need to keep trucking in? Get that cardboard for free, get it dumped off your place. It will produce a phenomenal amount of worm castings.
But I think what just again, thanks for reiterating that, Carol. If there is really not much fertility in your land, you like bringing in a starter, almost like your sourdough starter or your yeast of microbe and worm-rich soil is important, because you do have to kind of introduce something as like your starter to help build that ecology, basically, in depleted areas. So fabulous question. I think we should probably, if it's okay, move on to just a couple more slides and reorient the conversation. Is that okay?
Can I squeeze in one more? I'm sorry. I just thought this was really important. There was a question about the rye, Ricky, that you crimped. Will that come back and continue to grow under that corn in that scenario, or do you need to keep crimping it or mow it? How do you deal with that?
That's a great question. I haven't had the success that it would just keep growing, so it's died out.
Okay.
For whatever reason. Yeah, but that's a great question. But like I said, just tarp it or cardboard it and you're good to go.
I gotta tell you, I never thought I'd have like a typical suburban husband, but he got this like cool rechargeable weed whacker. And again, we're all off the grid, so it's always the big batteries always recharged with solar. But I'll see him out there sometimes, like whacking down some of the tall cover crops too to go back into the soil.
Great. All right. I think that was pretty much everybody's questions.
Okay. Wonderful. Great group. Thank you so much. I'm going to go back into screen share, and thank you, Carol, for orchestrating and organizing those so beautifully. So again, this is us younger, obviously. I think you can probably see that even from a small image of us in the speaker view. But again, this is getting into the piece about like, how do you get started with not all that much? So there were no structures on the land, and now this cute little building is stuccoed, and our son, who's taking a leave from college, is living in it. So it's been a number of things since we built it 23 years ago or something. But like instead of paying rent somewhere else while we were building the land and working on building the house, we decided to build a really small little, basically almost like a slightly bigger tiny house with like $10,000 of recycled materials. And so we were really able to kind of get going on the land, living, by our choice and desire and necessity in a very small little structure. And it was very sweet. Now we have a larger home that we also built, still fairly simple. But again, this is just how do you kind of get started? I don't know how many people on the call are trying to figure out like how to really get started, but maybe we can hear more about that. So this is really, just wanted to kind of show this, but really mostly have conversation about some of these things, creative ideas and challenges to accessing land and or using it well. And how do we even start or build a small farm? How does one even start or build a small farmer enterprise on the cheap, or even just to test the farming waters? You know, are there, what a big piece, of course, is if people are having to figure out how to, like, pay rent or whatever, that it's hard, right? Who are the organizations and individuals in your community that may have land to share or spare or sell? Be they faith-based institutions, municipal land conservation trusts, hospitals, schools, lots, lawns. And I want to say, all of these have their pros and cons, obviously, right? And so we'll talk more about that. Relationships don't always work out the way you think they're going to work out, right? So strategies not only for building relationships, but creating memorandums of agreement and having communication strategies and things like that. And other factors to be considered: resources to build soil, access to water, previous toxicity has been brought up. And, if you want to make a go at it economically as a farmer, what are the markets? Again, where's your niche? Where are there ways of marketing that emphasize partnerships and collaborations? Again, I know Tony Hall and maybe others were on this call who really rapidly got the mass local food delivery program, going this spring. So I'm not exactly sure how to do this. I don't know if we can keep these up or take them away and just have open conversation, but we really thought we just wanted to have some more idea sharing with this group around creative ideas and challenges to accessing land. And can we invite people to unmute if they want? Carol and John, what do you think? How do we do this?
Yes, we can. If we would like to be able to all see each other, it would be actually best to stop screen sharing because
Okay.
you can see everybody. I wonder if it's possible for you to copy and paste that text into the chat after we stop sharing.
Sorry. Let me try. I don't know how to do it off the screen. That might. I'm not sure if I can do that right now.
Okay.
Let me, people hold these in their mind for a moment, and I'm going to stop sharing and let's do our best. But again, the main thing I think to keep in mind is let's just have an open conversation about the ideas and challenges for accessing land for farming. How's that?
So if folks want to come off of their, turn on their video at this point to have a face-to-face conversation, they should feel welcome to. But if you don't want to be seen, that's also totally fine. And I think at this point we can invite people to come off of mute to have this discussion. And I will also read things from the chat if you don't want to speak live. So Noah is wondering about strategies for deer fencing in situations when farming on other people's land without guaranteed long-term presence, but also not using electric fencing because of children being present. That's a really interesting situation, Noah.
Yeah.
That wonderful, that what they call the invisible fencing is really good. Basically, it's a mesh, but you hardly see it, and it can come. Farm Tech is a great company to buy products from, but it can come up to 8, 9, 10 feet tall, but it's very benign. Invisible fencing, they call it.
And again, others, as questions or ideas come up, others should feel free to chime in with your ideas. I know there's a lot of rich experience in this group.
Thanks, Ginger. Ginger put a screenshot to for those questions in the chat. That's really helpful.
Thank you, Ginger.
It's quiet.
I can add a thought about deer fencing that's more temporary. The deer fencing that you can buy that's out there, I don't know, 7 feet tall or something like that. I've had some luck with using like a heavy gauge rebar driven into the ground that's tall, and then you kind of slip electric conduit or PVC over that, and then zip tie to that. With the you have to kind of be careful about your spacing because it does get a little floppy, but quite frankly, If you take some time and really do it well the first time, it certainly stays up for a season and longer, but it can be a temporary way to put up that pretty serious deer fencing, that vinyl 7-foot tall deer fencing without putting in the actual infrastructure of the ground posts that those same companies sell along with those products, which actually work really well. But if it is a temporary situation, that has worked really well for me.
Right. So any other, just along this conversation, and I know there's some people on the call that might be connected to, nonprofit organizations or, any other questions, ideas, challenges around accessing and using land?
I'm wondering if there's a downside to what you do. If you could say one thing like, oh, well, this method is great, but what's something you've learned that maybe is not good about what you do?
Farming in general, you mean, or the way we farm?
The way you farm with the cardboard and all that. Any limitations?
Boy, I keep doing it, so I don't have an answer, I guess.
You have to want to work physically.
Yeah, I think that's a big piece.
It's in some ways it's physical because you're not on a tractor, but in other ways you're saving a lot of time and labor. But
Okay, and another question that I had posted, I was wondering how you feel about putting cardboard on top of Hugelkultur beds.
I don't see any problem with it.
yeah, I haven't
Yeah.
tried it. We're not
Organic matter.
Yeah,
Okay.
great.
Hi, I'm wondering if you could maybe speak for a few minutes about those of us who aren't necessarily farmers or even have an ambition to be a farmer, but care a lot about these issues in terms of being advocates, for example, at the State House and in local communities, for being able to encourage the kind of farming in places where there aren't farmland, which can literally mean vacant lots in cities, or making beds in driveways, or places that we're already seeing happen in neighborhoods where food insecurity during COVID is certainly very much seen. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about what could help, if anything, on a public policy level to be able to enable this to happen in places where there aren't farmland.
Really, really great, really important question. I also want to mention that I'm going to get to that, but this afternoon I was asked just to be part of a question and answer session from 2 to 3:30 on growing community. So that is an important question there. But yeah, really glad you brought that up. A few things. For one, as some of you may have heard in the opening keynote, Senator Jo Comerford, we're very fortunate she's our state senator, has and NOFA. Thank you, NOFA. Incredible advocacy work of NOFA. Yay. On so many levels. There's a healthy soils bill coming forward, and that's huge because that and especially if there's some funds behind it, which hopefully there will be, that is going to help do just as it says, build more healthy soil throughout all our communities to increase food access and people's ability to farm on land. So that's one for sure. You could probably check in with Marty Dagoberto if you're not already, about how to be part of that advocacy or support that. Reparations is huge. Reparations, thank goodness, finally is coming into the narrative among more white people more and more, how to be, good allies in that way. But, I think this question of how can more land be rightfully returned to Indigenous people and Indigenous farmers? How can more land be made available to people of color and low wealth farmers? So thinking about ways you can start or be involved in reparations movements in your own community so it's authentic for you is huge. And I think also some of these practices, it's interesting. I think Greg Watson mentioned the other day that Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative was the first one, I shouldn't say the first, but was an organization that actually gained the power of eminent domain, which is usually a something that, state bodies or government bodies hold to actually claim land. So I don't know much about this, but I'm interested in the idea of community groups gaining land by eminent domain to make it more available to the people within a community, especially again, indigenous and low wealth and BIPOC farmers. So thank you for bringing that up. And other people might want to add to that.
I just want to, for the sake of time, I just want to share something I feel really strongly about is that we have a lot of young people come to the farm, and especially around how to access land. And basically, we have young people that are basically paying $12,000 to $15,000 a year at least renting. Money's going out the window. And how do we get land? So I was saying, if you have family members, anyone, you tell your family, look, you want to help me build some equity, give me that $15,000. I could pay it back over time. I can get on some land. Rather than just basically every year throwing that $15,000 out to the landlord and not building any equity, because that's really what it's all about, building equity. 40 acres and a mule. I mean, it's about that should have happened. Building equity, power. Back to Malcolm X. But the point is that we have to think creatively. But we just basically we're tied into this work, but we're never going to save up the money. But if you get a little bit of money, you could pay it back over time. It really is, how do we do that? And I think it's really important because otherwise, young folks are just going to keep paying rent, never get on land, and we have to be really creative and support people. And back to the reparations, that's the same sort of thing. Set up funds, GoFundMe. Any way to collect some money and put people on land.
Does anybody else want to respond to the question or this conversation?
Can I just take a moment to share what's been coming in on the chat for people who didn't want to come off mute?
Oh.
So there's actually a comment related to that. So I'll just read these two in order. Maya was saying, do you have more thoughts about being in relationship with indigenous communities when starting to farm, own, or occupy land? I think you addressed that to some extent. But they were wondering, did you run into any of these issues yourself when you started? And then Adam was saying, we're not yet farmers, but are looking to start a fundraising or a foundation to provide grants to help BIPOC and beginning farmers access and use land for farming, as you were mentioning. Can you recommend any specific contexts who might be good for learning or partnering?
And then I think you responded, right, about the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust.
You might have more thoughts than that.
Did you want to speak back to either of those questions? For us, it's interesting when we were looking for land and we're trying to negotiate this particular piece of land. Again, we're in a low wealth community, but the main issue that I think we were dealing with was sort of the some of the imperialism that can be inherent in the preservation movement. And so questioning a lot about the pattern. So there was a very wealthy person who was able to make possible this purchase of land around ours for a land conservation for Mass Audubon, not ours, but that kind of made it all possible. And so I'm kind of not getting directly to the issue, but I think at the time when we were looking for land, that was like a big issue. And also the whole question of here we are in a low wealth community on the edge with a lot of families in the center of the community who are, living in really substandard housing with absentee landlords who would love to raise their kids on a lovely small piece of land, right? So, and here's all this land being protected and preserved around ours that wasn't our quote unquote ours to start with. So I think that was more of the kind of initial issue and conversation when we were thinking about it, like just because we have a little bit to put down, why do we get to do this and be part of a land preservation, which is sort of an imperialist act in some ways. So did you want to say more though about the relationship with indigenous, some of these other questions asked in here?
Connect, definitely connect, that's all I can say about that.
Yeah. I think we've also, and this is again, not trying to skirt the issue, we do have a number of indigenous friends. Interesting, some of our neighbors Wampanoag, where, so they've moved to the area now, and we met on the Cape, you know, where we had more connection with Mashpee and Wampanoag folks. But I think also just like kind of trying to create the most collaborative, respectful neighborhood we can where we live and be part of that, you know. So here's this conflict about land ownership. And so it's kind of like, well, like at this moment, while we're trying to work through some of that, like the least we can do is have a really loving, connected, contributing neighborhood. And there's a lot more work to do. So thank you for that question. Yeah.
Can I ask one question? Do you know anybody who's working with a hospital to put raised gardens or food access for either low income or just to encourage healthy eating, which hospitals aren't anyways, but you know what I mean? Because hospitals are often sitting on a fair amount of land.
Yeah, we actually have done that. And I actually have a meeting at the end of this month with the CEO of a Hayward hospital, who initiated the meeting, because we've worked some with them, both to put in initially wellness gardens, small wellness gardens at Athol Memorial Hospital, which then the dining services took over, which was great. And then they did like a renovation, so that changed. But I also put in with staff, and there were people in residence there, but wellness gardens at a center for recovery that's connected to Hayward Hospital. So I'm glad you asked that, because I think that's really important. So again, this is, to me, this is sort of a whole nother big conversation, because this is more about the food justice elements of growing food everywhere that I agree are critically important. So I've done a bunch of that, not for farming as a livelihood, but as part of the work of our food justice work through Seed.
But it also reconnects people at vulnerable points in their lives to the whole life cycle, and there isn't a whole lot of that that's going on. And anyways, I just wanted to know if you had looked at that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've done that. And we've also, I've been involved with, doing that with many schools over the years through different school garden and farm to school efforts. That has been a big part of my world. And Ricky just put the watch in front of me here. So we're getting close, actually, to close. So we just have one more, but thank you for that question. Come back to the Q&A this afternoon at 2:00 on growing community. But
I mention one thing there in terms of the Boston Medical Center was mentioned in the comments in the chat. And it produces, as you may know, 6,000 pounds of food for its patients and staff. To set up cooking lessons, brings kids from the city to do the harvesting and the work on that farm. And I just wanted to mention, I'm with Mothers Out Front, and we've just passed the first stage through of an ordinance to mandate green roofs on any new construction, with the idea of recognizing that a lot of urban areas don't have a lot of land left on the ground, but they sure have a lot of roof space that can be used for green gardens and for green roofs. So that's something that we're advocating for in Cambridge, and I'm hoping other people will take that up as well.
Yeah, this is a huge other and critical and vast conversation, but agreed that, and this is work I've been involved in too. We just couldn't cover it all in one workshop. So Kara, I'm not even sure what I'm showing right now, if anything, if I'm showing our final slide or not, or do we have the gallery view on?
You are showing your final slide. You could hit present if you want to maximize it.
Okay, here, I'll just make it bigger. So I think we're nearing the end. If we were sitting in a circle together, we'd hear one word from anyone who wanted to shout out a word about what they take from this workshop. Can we kind of do that just for 2 minutes?
Yeah.
So if you want to unmute, go ahead, Carol.
No, I was just going to say, go ahead and do that. I'm going to just to let people know, I'll be dropping some of the links that you need for your finding your next session and all the other things in the chat. And please do fill out the evaluation to let us know how this session went for you. But yeah, go ahead and say words that describe your experience.
And just before you do that, we wrote a book, Making Love While Farming, Field Guide to a Life of Passion and Purpose, published by Levelers Press. They're the website for that. But it's also a book and a half-hour consult are in the NOFA auction. And last time I looked, it wasn't high enough. So, that's up there. But yeah, let's just hear if people want to unmute and chime in a word or a phrase of something they take from this auction, sort of popcorn random style. Go for it.
I'm going to jump
I'll
in.
just, okay. Wait.
Ricky, I think both of you guys, I think there's a saying out there that's, if change the way you see the world, if you want to see the world change. And I think you two really represent that in a wonderful way. And the way that you're looking at the soil and the ground and your relation with nature is exactly that. And you're a great example of a paradigm shift that is so needed right now. So hats off.
Thanks, John.
I'd like to jump in and just say the two words that come to mind are grassroots and partnership. I think that's really what's going to, elevate the movement forward with this, resilient lands and connection to Mother Earth. Yeah. And I have to tell you, the first time I visited your farm, like what, 10, 11 years ago, with my first commissioner, it was the first time I ever heard of no-till, because I come from a farming background where we had lots of tractors. So thank you for opening my eyes.
Yeah, thank you, Rose. It's so good to see you. Hope to see you again soon.
Same
At
here.
our farm. Come visit again.
A couple words have come in on the chat. Empowering,
Absolutely.
wholesome, experiment, and connect. I wanted to make sure those people got their voices heard.
I just want to say I love your creativity and focus on taking care of ourselves while doing the work, sustainability, and the building community while we do this critical work. So thank you both.
And thanks for all you do. Great to work with you.
Tony says inspiration, nourishment, and warmth.
Nice.
Anyone else want to say a word or two?
Oh, sorry, Kara, I didn't hear the last thing you said. Oh, okay. Oh.
Well, I will just say I have read Deb and Ricky's book and I really, really love it. And I've also used one of their consulting sessions and really got a lot out of that too. So I definitely encourage you to reach out and work with them and read their book. And you can definitely go bid on it in the auction. It's a nice package.
All right. Wonderful.
So thank you.
Thank you all so much. I think we're at 10:30,
Thank you
right?
so much, Ricky and Deb. This was really, really wonderful. I just appreciate you guys so much for your incredible work. And thanks to everybody who attended the session and participated. It was really great to be able to connect in this way, even though we're remote.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Take
everybody.
care, everyone. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you in
Thank you, Caro and John. Thank you, NOFA.